want answers.
I want the truth. The truth.
You can't handle the truth.
Welcome to The Truth Hurts. This is your host, Sule Prince. Sule Prince.
Daddy, that really hurts.
Whether you like it or not, sometimes the truth hurts. The truth hurts. And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Will set you free. So welcome to another great episode of Truth Hurts podcast. If this is your first time that you are listening or watching, please make sure that you visit our resourceful website at thetruthhurtspodcast.org. That is the thetruthhurtspodcast.org. We have a lot of informative videos, we have audios, and we have great content for you. Also, please subscribe to our podcast and our YouTube channel. Your support is always appreciated, so let's get started. Today, I have with me Katie Summers. Katie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Good. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks. How are you?
Good. Thank you.
Good.
Well, Katie Summers is the Director of Outreach for Toronto Right for Life, which is an important organization. Katie, how did you get involved with this organization?
I started volunteering doing pro-life outreach a few years ago with the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform. Okay. And I started volunteering with them through Twitter, of all places.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I clicked on a link. I ended up on their website and I saw abortion victim imagery for the first time in my life. Okay. In my 30s even.
Wow.
And and so after seeing that, I was profoundly changed and affected. And I immediately started volunteering with them. And then I was contacted by someone within Toronto Right to Life who said, I'd really like you to do outreach right here in Toronto because it's where I live. And so that's how I started working with Toronto Right to Life.
Well, abortion is such a polarizing issue. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of emotions when it comes towards abortion, whether you're for it or against it. It's all riddled with emotion. Your involvement into it was just stirred from seeing the victim photography?
Yes. As soon as I saw it, I mean, it's interesting because I had such a visceral reaction to it. I was so upset when I first saw it, but I was also angry initially. I thought, this is not how to change people's minds. This is not how to reach people. And I thought, this is too much. It's too far. And it sends the wrong message about the pro-life movement. Yes. And days later, when I still couldn't get the images out of my head, I came to realize that is exactly why they're being used, right? That is in fact a very effective way to share the message about what abortion really is. And so I completely changed my opinion on abortion victim imagery in the pro-life movement because of how it affected me. And I needed no persuasion. So it's interesting because I can certainly sympathize with people who are on the other side or feel the way that I used to feel.
Yes. I personally myself, I hated seeing the victim photography. It disgusted me when they put pamphlets at my door, when I'd see them going across the street. Absolutely disgusted. I understood the cause, but I was thinking, why would you do that? Mm-hmm. Why show these images? And do you have any history or any reason why they would show these images?
Oh yeah. So when I started volunteering with the organization, they made the argument, or they explained why they used the images, and it's because of social reform movements of the past that used the exact same type of imagery of the victims to change the culture. So examples they would use are, say, the story of Emmett Till.
Yes.
And his mother wanting his casket open so that she could show what segregation had done to her son, right? And that was what sparked Rosa Parks to not give up her seat on the bus, and and the whole culture was changed. So that's one example, and another is Louis Hine and child labor.
Yes,
he used images of child labor in the public square so that people could see the atrocities that were happening to children in factories, and that brought about a change in child labor and eventually led to it being illegal. So we've seen throughout history that exposing the victims of a human rights violation really does change people's minds on the issue, especially when it's something that is already, that is kind of accepted in the culture, which abortion certainly is in Canada.
Yes.
Yeah.
I learned that William Wilberforce used it also with the abolition of slavery, drawing pictures of the slave ship and also having coinage of slaves, which brought a realization to what actually is happening in slavery. And another thing that I also learned as well was Martin Luther King. And this is what's interesting about him. He wanted pictures to be taken of those who were beaten by cops and bruised on the ground, because he knew that these images will create the greatest change, and that's exactly what happened. So it was only until then that I understood victim photography.
Yes, me too.
As much as it is very hard to see, it does stir somebody up inside to either rethink what they're doing, or unfortunately ignore it. Have you had any results from people who have seen victim photography? Oh,
every day, every single day that I'm out on the streets showing the victims of abortion, I see changes all the time, especially if we use video. Video of abortion has the biggest impact on changing people's minds. When people see a video, that's pretty much it. I've hardly seen, it's very rare that somebody doesn't feel differently about abortion after seeing a video. But the images themselves, I see it every single day. I hear things like, I didn't know it looked like that. I thought it was just a clump of cells.
Yes.
I wish I'd known that it looked that way before I had one. I've heard that. One of my favorite testimonies was a young man I met at Ryerson. And he said, I asked him what he thought about abortion. And he said, I used to be pro-choice. And it was upon reflecting on the images that you guys bring to campus that I changed my mind.
Wow.
And I said, wow. And why is that? And he said, because it really doesn't look like a clump of cells. And he said, and it was wrong of me to live my life treating women like objects and just expect them to go and have an abortion if anything were to happen. And he said, so not only have I changed my mind, but I've changed my behavior. He said, because I don't want to be responsible for that. And he pointed to my sign. So he treats women differently because of the signs that we bring to his campus. Yeah. So that was a really amazing example of how that can, how it can change not only someone's opinion on abortion, but also the way they behave. Right. Because that was an incredible testimony.
Great. So, Katie, can you tell me why they have sold the view of it being a clump of cells? That's what I hear. I've done the victim photography, and everybody always says it's a clump of cells. So why can't we say, it is a clump of cells?
We can, and I do all the time. I say, well, first of all, the images, and I always use, when I'm using victim image photography, I always also include images of healthy preborn children for reference, right? So I'll say to them, well, either I will attack the clump of cells argument and say, well, can you see this child has a face, has arms, has legs, has a body? Like, how is that a clump of cells? Or I'll say, well, yes, you're right. And so are you. and so am I. We are all clumps of cells that comprise a whole human organism, just like the preborn. And then I'll ask them sometimes, because what they're trying to say is, well, it's so small.
Yeah.
So then I'll just ask, well, are human rights determined by our size? Do larger people get more human rights than smaller people, or are human rights for everybody regardless of size?
I always think about it as, since when has a clump of cells ever garnered so much emotion? If I showed you a picture of a blood clot inside my body, I'm sure people wouldn't throw coffee at those pictures or stand around an individual and harass them because I have a picture of blood clots. So why would this garner so much emotions?
Right.
Also, attack the argument that they say it is not a life. It's not a life yet until a certain point. What would you say?
Well, I would say, what point is that? Or what is it that they have to acquire in order to be considered a life to you? And some people give different answers. They'll say, oh, it has to have a heartbeat, or it has to have a brain, or it has to have, sentience or whatever. And so I like to use an example of comparing to an amoeba, right? And I'll ask, do you know what an amoeba is? And they'll say, yes, it's a single-celled organism. That's right. So does an amoeba have a brain? And they'll say, well, no. Why not? Because it's a single-celled organism. It'll never have a brain. Right. And say, let's take an embryo. Does he or she have a brain yet? No. Well, why not? Because he or she hasn't grown one yet.
Okay.
So what you're saying is that we're just talking about a younger human being, right? It's not in our nature to have a brain at a certain age.
Yes.
And then I'll just ask them, are human rights only meant for those who are older? Is it based on age?
Yes.
Or are they for all humans?
Yes, because if we think about development, even of a brain, even when a child is born, its brain is not fully developed. So do we have a right to take life?
Now, Sule, I usually have the advantage of being older than the people I'm speaking to because I'm on university campuses a lot. And so I'll often get to ask them, well, do you mind my asking how old you are? And they'll say, oh, I'm 19, I'm 20, I'm whatever. I'm usually older. And I'll say, well, with respect, your brain is not fully developed, but mine is. Do I have or merit more human rights than you?
Wow.
Because mine is fully developed. I'm over 25.
Maybe, yes, exactly.
So people don't often make that association. They think that birth is some landmark in, say, brain development, or when it's really just a change of location, right?
Yeah, it's true. And I think the terms that they call it, embryo, fetuses, is a way for them to substitute the word life.
Yeah.
That is actually, this is a life. Because if you're going to admit that it is a life, then all of a sudden it nullifies the idea of abortion. But whenever you talk to people about abortions, and I just talked to an individual this week, they always come up with these grave arguments. Say she's 12 and lives in poverty, and her uncle raped her, and now she's going to live in a life of more poverty. It's always these radical scenarios. But some of those scenarios are of a concern. So what would you say about a younger individual that was raped by a parent or an uncle, a father, incestuous? Why should that person keep that baby that is developing in them?
Right. Those cases are absolutely heartbreaking. The fact that they happen at all is a travesty. I'm sure, we can always find common ground when it comes to agreeing that should never happen.
Yeah.
With the person that we're talking about this issue with. What I like to sometimes point out, though, is that this child who has been violated in such a terrible way and robbed of their innocence makes us all feel so terrible, because it is so heinous to do that to an innocent child, right? The question is, should we add another victim to this situation. The child conceived in this terrible circumstance is also an innocent human being. And so we should never further victimize an innocent human being to try to make up for what's happened to another. We're not actually taking away what's happened to the young girl. Mm-hmm. We are just adding another atrocity onto it. Not to mention the fact that she is going to need a lot of help and support, inevitably, after a situation like this. It's going to take a long time for her to heal. Mm-hmm. But abortion can often have devastating and lifelong consequences and effects as well. Yeah. And it might be very traumatic for her to realize what happened to her child one day. Yeah. So under no circumstances should anybody, especially a child, be forced to be a parent when they're not ready. You know, that's what we do have adoption for. That's what we have foster care for. However, we should never give the death penalty to an innocent human being for their father's crime.
That's true. And, you know, you made me think a little bit further in what you said, because if you put a young child through abortion, that is another issue that they're going to deal with. Not only the fact that they aborted a child, but the whole process of them going through abortion, being on a table, violated through instruments that are going to be put inside them. That's another issue. So it is more than just having the child. It's the fact that this child has been traumatized regardless. And having an abortion is going to further traumatize them as well. It's going to add a multiple layer onto it.
That's right. And it also creates another victim, which we can't ignore. Yeah. And as much as, you know, giving birth, it should never have to happen for a 12-year-old. That's not something that we want. We do have to remember that physiologically and medically, we have the ability to help someone in that situation, right? If a girl is able to get pregnant, then we have the technology to make delivery go as well as possible for her.
That is a good point. Never thought about it. So people are going to say, okay, but the child is going to be deformed. Or what about a person who found out that their child has Down syndrome or something like that? What would you say?
You mean as far as whether someone considering abortion because of these situations?
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say fear is such a natural reaction to the unknown, right? And that's one of the things I hate the most about abortion. I feel like it preys on that.
It does.
And instead of sending a message of empowerment of, you know, yes, I know this is scary. Yes, I know this is the unknown, but there is support available, there's help available, and there's giving it the time to kind of absorb the new reality and seek out the right help and resources so that you have a change of perspective is everything, right? And it often comes with time, right? Whenever we're scared.
Yes, it's true.
It's usually, we kind of get over that once our perspective is changed. And that comes with knowledge and support and talking with other people. And so people are afraid, you know, what kind of life is my child going to have? You know, how am I going to look after them when I'm older? These are serious issues to think about, but there is possibilities there, right? There are options.
Yeah.
But with abortion, you take away all the possibilities. You end the life, and what you don't take away is the what ifs that you're left with.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? Like if somebody chooses abortion, then they may always ask themselves, well, what if it wouldn't have been so hard? Or what would my child have been like? Or what if they, you know, had an easier time than I was thinking? And that's something that can plague you forever. Not to mention that, you know, our right to life doesn't depend on how healthy we are or how young or how old. It's just, you know, we're all entitled to the same human rights. And so we should never abort people because of disability, or because what kind of message does that send to people living with Down syndrome or living with disabilities?
They don't really matter. They're a burden to society.
Yeah.
And it's so funny. I used to work with kids with autism and Down syndrome. And when you work with a child with Down syndrome, they're probably some of the most happiest kids that you could ever work with.
I knew you were going to
actually
say
add
that.
to life, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
They add
Yeah.
to life, and people want to. Oh, I'm having a kid that has Down syndrome. Okay,
Mhm.
they could enrich your life in so many ways
Oh, yes.
that you could ever imagine.
Well, that's the problem. That's what I meant when I said, the fear that comes with the unknown. There's also the unknown joy,
Yes.
right? The
Yeah.
joy that you're not going to get to experience if you focus on the fear,
Mhm.
right? There's always good things that come out of things that frighten us.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
It's like they're trying to make abortion something to be celebrated, because
Mhm.
you have this shout your abortion, women marching around in groups saying I had an abortion, and they're making it something that you could celebrate, which is not something that you should celebrate. But this is what's interesting. They always say my body, my rights, right?
Mhm.
My body, my choice. My body,
My choice, yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
my body, my choice. So have you ever heard of the comedian David Chappelle?
Yes.
Okay. He has an interesting way of looking at this. Now, a lot of people probably won't like it, but what he says is actually interesting. If a woman could say it's my body and my choice, if a male wants to continue to have that child, she could look and say, well, it's my body, it's my choice. But if he doesn't want the child and she wants the child, and then she has the child, he has to live a lifetime of paying for the child.
Mhm.
So he says, my money, my choice. Well, it's
Yeah.
hard. It's
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah.
But if you think about the logic, he's saying, how come you have the rights to take a child that I want, but when I don't want the child, you have the right to have it, and I have to pay for it? What do you think
Right.
about that?
I think he's tapping into a very big inconsistency in our treatment of men and women when it comes to reproduction, right?
Mm-hmm.
We say, or a lot of people will say, well, consent to sex is not consent to pregnancy. People say that a lot, who are pro-choice usually. But it is for a man. It is for a man in our society, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even if a man has sex after on a one-night stand, he doesn't know the woman, and she says she's using birth control, but she isn't, and she gets pregnant and wants the child, then he is responsible for that child for 18 years, as he should be, right? I'm not saying he shouldn't be. I think Dave Chappelle maybe is. I'm not saying he shouldn't be. But it's interesting that we don't hold women to the same standard, right? We don't say, well, you engaged in the activity that created a dependent, and now you're responsible to look after that dependent, at least until you pass off the responsibility to somebody else, right? Say with adoption.
Yeah.
Right? We don't hold women to the same standard that we hold men, and I don't think that's fair. So I think that's kind of what Dave Chappelle is tapping into.
Yeah. He got an interesting response by what he said, but it is kind of true. So how many abortions happen in Canada?
Somewhere in the ballpark of 90 to 100,000 per year.
Could you imagine 90 to 100,000 per year?
Yeah.
Abortions?
Yeah. But that's probably a low estimate because we don't have the very best reporting of it, and we don't hold the numbers on abortion to the same standards of recording that we do other medical procedures. So it might even be a low number, low estimate.
Wow.
Yeah.
I heard in Canada the abortion laws are way further than any other country, where we could abort up until second before the baby is delivered. Is that correct?
That is technically correct. Yes. We don't have any law whatsoever. So China, North Korea, and Canada are all countries with no laws on abortion, and they're the only ones with no laws on abortion. Every other country has some sort of law, some sort of restriction at a certain point. We do not. So though it may be difficult to find a doctor who is willing to perform an abortion before birth, if you were able to, there would be no legal consequence to that doctor. So yeah, it is legal through all 9 months.
So in your terms, what do we need to do?
We need to expose abortion for what it is. Okay. So we need to speak the truth. Those of us who know the truth about that abortion, takes an innocent human life and that that's wrong, we need to have the courage to say that whenever we have the opportunity, as uncomfortable as it may be. And if we know somebody who is contemplating abortion, we have an obligation to share that same truth with them. They need to know that this is not an option they should be considering, and also offer them the help that they really do need.
So what help is out there?
So there's pregnancy resource centers all over Canada. There's an organization called Choice for Two, and it's just choice4number2.com. And that organization will set someone up with their local pregnancy resource center all over the country. And these centers offer women all sorts of resources that they may be needing for whatever reason it is that has them contemplating abortion. Maybe they're in an abusive relationship. Maybe they have low income. Maybe they have no support. And they will work to get these things handled in a way that is life affirming to both.
Yes.
That's the important thing, right? Like, people always use poverty or abuse or these difficult circumstances as a justification for abortion, but they forget that just because you're taking the child out of the situation doesn't mean you're taking the woman out of it.
Yeah,
right?
That's so true.
Yeah, so we always should try to alleviate suffering, but never by eliminating sufferers.
Yeah. So funny, there's another comedian, his name is, why am I forgetting his name right now? He's D.L. Hughley.
Okay.
He was a part of the Kings of Comedy. He's a big comedian, multimillionaire. He was a product of rape.
Wow.
And look at him today. If you ever research him, D.L. Hughley, yep. His mother never chose to abort him. And I think that's interesting. Everybody that is for abortion are those who have not been aborted themselves.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. Yes.
You got saved from it. You got saved from something that you are endorsing. Isn't that sad?
Yeah, it is sad. Yeah, it's ultimately, that's what it comes down to. It's not, when people say my body, my choice, it's not your body that gets aborted.
And that's good. Explain that a little bit more, because that's what they say. It's my body.
Yeah. Well,
so what would you, as an individual, how would you respond to that?
I usually say, how many bodies are there in a pregnancy? Right? Is it just your body, or when you're pregnant, do you have 4 arms and 4 legs and 20 fingers and 20 toes? Or I'll say, well, but it's not your body that gets aborted. It's someone else's body. Yeah. Right. And so if you use the argument that I'm entitled to my bodily autonomy, I have the right to do with my body as I wish. Well, abortion robs someone else of their bodily autonomy and their right to life. Right. So it's a double violation.
That is very interesting. That's a good way to look at it. I don't think people see it like that. They see it as something that is invading the woman's body, that in a sense doesn't have a right to be there, kind of like a kidney stone. Right.
Well, a kidney stone is something that has gone wrong in your kidneys, but a child in the womb is using the organ in exactly the way it was intended to be used, right?
Amazing. That is so good, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's just the way it is. Sometimes I'll ask people, what's the function and purpose of a uterus?
Yeah.
And when they think about that, if there's an organ inside of our bodies that doesn't keep us alive, but it keeps someone else alive, then how can they not have the right to use it? It exists for that exact purpose.
That is so, Katie, that's a real good argument. You make me think a little bit further, because we never look at a woman pregnant and say, how many weeks is your fetus?
Right.
We always say, oh, yeah, you're pregnant, you're having a baby.
Mm-hmm.
If a woman is pregnant and slips on the floor, there's a big major concern. They want to get her up. They want to get her to. Why? It's a clump of cells. It's nothing. Why that?
Right.
Why is that so important?
Well, when we base whether someone is a person or a human being or not based on whether they're wanted, then we get into a situation where we have Schrodinger's fetus, where a woman is pregnant with both an unwanted clump of cells and a valuable little baby at the exact same time, right? And then it's just a question of which one is it based on her feelings. And we can't base human rights on other people's feelings about us. You know, when we've done that in history, it has always been a horrible human rights atrocity.
Yeah. That's what they did to the Jews.
Yes.
They didn't consider them persons. That's what they did to the African-American slaves. They perceived them as 3/5 of man, which they equate to a donkey. So that's why they're able to do what they were able to do in good conscience in their mind, because this is just a working tool, and that's how they see the African slave. So once you just change the language, it allows you to freely do what you desire to do.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, this is a sad scenario. Okay, last question.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any scenario in which you believe that abortion is okay?
No.
No?
There is no situation in which we need to actively kill an innocent human being, not even to save a woman's life. Okay. So if a woman's life is in danger because of the pregnancy, and this happens, you know, later in pregnancy, it's usually preeclampsia. So her blood pressure is rising very high and she's at risk of a massive heart attack or stroke, and the pregnancy needs to end. Mm-hmm. Or early in pregnancy, an ectopic pregnancy is life-threatening at times, where the child is growing outside of the uterus, say usually in the fallopian tube, and if the pregnancy continues, it will rupture, she will bleed to death, the child dies immediately. So there are definitely situations, but in no situation do we have to go into the woman's body, target the child, kill them, and take them out. We can always treat what's causing the problem. So with preeclampsia, we can induce labor, or we can do a C-section. Yeah. C-section is a 45-minute procedure, will save her life the fastest.
Yeah, and the child.
And the child. And keep in mind, when people bring up these cases, when they're bringing up abortion in the case to save a woman's life, that's a wanted child, right? That, like, this woman wants her child. She just has a life-threatening condition. So we want to save both, always. Mm-hmm. Especially in these situations, but we should always save both if we can. Yes. If we can't, that doesn't mean we let the woman die. We just never have to kill her child in order to end the pregnancy. Yeah. One day we will have the medical technology to save all, embryos and fetuses, no matter how early they're born. Mm-hmm. We don't have that yet. But there's a difference between being unable to save that child and deliberately killing them. Okay. I said last question, but you made me think of one more question. Okay. Yeah. I read just last week an article of a doctor who they are stripping him of his license because there's a woman whose baby was born with no nose, no eyes, no face. Wow. Hard situation, and I don't know if the article is saying that if he would have informed them earlier that she could have had a decision on the right for the child to live or not. I don't know if that the article was indicating, just more of the incompetence of the doctor and his ability not to do proper investigation on the child. Mm-hmm. But look at that situation. No eyes, no nose, no face. Half a skull. What would you do? What kind of life is this child going to have? Probably not a full one as far as life expectancy. They're probably not going to live very long. At that point, in a situation like that, we know that we're dealing with a tragedy. We know that the outcome is going to be, grief and sadness and loss. The question then still is, what's the right way to handle this? Like, what do we deliberately take a life, end a life, even if it's going to die? I mean, we're all going to die, right? That's no excuse to kill one another. But also think of the parents. No matter what, they're going to lose that child.
Yeah.
And they should have the opportunity to meet that child, hold that child, love that child for as long as they're here, because that is going to be easier to live with, I think, having memories with that child for as short as they may be, than the what ifs and the guilt of ending that child's life early.
Yeah.
You know, when we love someone and we know that they're going to die, do we try to spend as much time as possible with them, or do we cut their time short?
Katie, that's a really good perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for your time. Is there anything you'd like to add about your organization?
Yeah, so we, Toronto Right to Life, we do outreach on the streets, and we're always looking for volunteers to join. We also do presentations for communities, either in high schools or church groups or whatever, on the topic of abortion. And we do it in a secular way so that even religious people can get a great arguments for anybody to hear, whether they're religious or not, to be persuasive. So if anybody is interested in volunteering or booking one of those, please go to trtl.ca.
Perfect. Well, Katie, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
I have Kathy always in my mind. Katie, the reality is this is a hot issue. It's a hard topic, but facts don't care about your feelings.
It's true.
And sometimes the truth hurts.
That's true. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Bye now.
Bye.